We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end...
What will I become?
Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Singletracks podcast. My name is Jeff, and today my guest is Amanda Carey. Amanda is the president of NICA, the National Interscholastic Cycling Association, a nonprofit that develops mountain biking programs for student athletes across the United States. Prior to joining NICA, Amanda served as the executive director of Mountain Bike the Tetons, and she's also served as a mountain bike coach. Thanks for joining me, Amanda.
All right, happy to be here.
So in addition to like your advocacy and coaching roles, I read that you were also a professional mountain bike racer. What drew you to the sport initially?
Gosh, so many things, but I think it was a little by accident. I've told this story many times in my history before, but I, after college, moved to Jackson Hole to be a ski bum and really didn't have a plan for the summer because I never planned to stay for the summer. And whole long story short, I had a beater hardtail, just was looking for something to do in the summertime until it snowed again, really. And I think what I found was something that really aligned with how I like to move in the mountains, right? It was just to be out there, be out in nature, but also get that benefit of a good workout, a hard work, and boy, that adrenaline rush of downhill. There was never anything quite like it. That I found matched snowboarding, and now I'm a skier too, but that downhill aspect of it, I think just kind of checked all the boxes. And I had grown up playing ball sports and, the basketball and the softball, and we weren't really a mountain or outdoor mountain family, but I got introduced to that in college and really fell in love with it. And and I think really what kept me in it was that degree of challenge, right? As I think every single time you go out for a mountain bike ride, there's something new to learn. There's a new rock. There's a new feature. There's a new way to ride a line you feel like you've ridden a million times before. And I think that to this day is what keeps me engaged in the sport because you can always do something a little bit better, see something new, and, ride a new trail. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you've held a number of roles within, I don't want to say the industry, but I guess that's a good catch-all. Is it just your passion for mountain biking that like keeps you pursuing these types of roles, or like when was the point where you're like, I want to take this thing that I love and make it into a career?
I think I'd have to go back to how I was raised, and it just was both my parents are public school teachers. And I think just being in that environment constantly, it was just service. And it was never, outwardly stated of that was the goal of life or career. But I just felt like all growing up, that's what my parents were modeling. And it was always just service as something greater good, giving back. And I don't think I've actually held a position or had a job other than, your typical restaurant jobs and making ends meet in a ski town that hasn't been a nonprofit. I've always aligned my interest and my passion with that professional pursuit of kind of giving back and that greater good. And for me, it just fell into cycling. Started with environment and went into cycling pedestrian advocacy. And then from there, it was just this, for me, again, I know it's personal for everybody, especially how they get into nonprofit, but this idea that you can take a personal passion, you can find something that's mission driven, and you can use your talents, your expertise, or your energy to put towards a cause that makes someone's lives better, or the environment better, or the world a better place. Just as always where I found my professional alignment. So I think it's really what it is. It's just this idea of service beyond yourself and towards a cause.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, I think some of our listeners might be surprised to know that prior to the pandemic in 2020, mountain bike participation growth has basically been flat. Like I think maybe if we look at it long term, maybe it grows 2 or 3% a year, but it's not like growing a ton. What do you think has kept the sport from growing up until this point?
Gosh, a lot of things. I'm with you where it's been a surprising leveling off of growth. I think with maybe pre-pandemic, it felt like we were on an upswing. And then during the pandemic, believe it or not, right, it was that surprise of everyone's outside and trying to get out and use the trails in every way, shape, or form. And, sales went up with mountain bikes and road bikes and all those things. And it just seemed like, I don't know what the collective miss was there, but I'm trying to find out. I think everybody's trying to find out what that lesson really is. And I think at least from what I've seen and I've observed is that we've almost hit this kind of full saturation point where we've hit, and I say hit, like we've reached the people that are somewhat, I don't know how to say this, maybe somewhat they're familiar with mountain biking, right? And I see this in NICA as well too. It's the same thing where an uncle rides or a neighbor rides, or it's a little bit insular in the sense where we're a self-perpetuating community and we don't really go outside of our little circles to find that new ridership. And I see that in my own community. I see that in NICA communities. And I see that just in the cycling industry in general, is that we've not done enough to look, and this is one of NICA's focuses absolutely in the future. We have absolutely not done enough to reach that new rider and that new family and make them feel welcome, right? Make them feel a part of this community, that mountain biking especially is attainable to them. Because I think about mountain biking in general it's not an easy sport, right? There's a high level of intimidation, whether it's a lot of folks don't even know how to move outside at all, right? They're used to being indoors, and then you get the equipment, and then you get the transportation to the trails, or how would I even find a trail? I mean, the barriers go on and on and on. And I think that we've not done, and I say we as this collective we, it's the cycling industry, it's current participants, it's trail users in general, is we've not been inviting. I think that's really something that everybody, whether you're just a mountain biker or you work in the industry or you work in a youth development organization like NICA, it's just setting that intention towards inviting more folks. I think that's where we're going to see more growth. And there's absolutely infrastructure and trail needs too, right? There's, we need trails closer to people. We need trails closer to kids. We need trails closer to home. We need to look at all of those infrastructure and lifestyle barriers that create, friction, right? To getting what's keeping you from getting on your bike and going out to a trail versus what's easier to get on the couch or, go to the bar after work or whatever that is, right? But I think that was a really long answer, but I think the short answer is it's a lot of different things. But I think the easiest step that we can all take, and I say again, anybody who mountain bikes or is adjacent to the industry, is just be more inviting to the people that don't yet mountain bike and make that an intention. And, I talk a lot about internally at NICA of how we as an organization try really hard to live our core value of inclusivity. And that's not just including riders of all skill, right? That's being intentionally inviting. That's being intentionally open to helping people that don't understand mountain biking or don't, know how to get a trail or get to a bike or anything like that. I mean, I think that's a big part of it. Yeah. So I think we have a lot of opportunity for growth, but it all starts with the one person, I think, for sure.
Yeah. So I believe NICA got its start around 2009. And I get the sense that, ever since then, the industry has really been sort of hoping that NICA can attract like a new rider, younger participants. Are you seeing that so far? Like how is NICA impacting overall mountain bike participation in terms of numbers or maybe just like demographics?
Yeah, I think we're having a huge impact. I think collectively, NICA as an organization, since we started, and even the NorCal League predated the start of the actual national organization, NICA in 2009, we've had a tremendous impact. Just looking at the metrics, I mean, we've graduated over 90,000 student athletes from the program since we started. Wow. And those student athletes, again, this is all survey data, but they tell us that on average, they bring 3 or 4 more people with them into the sport when they join. Wow. Parents, grandparents, siblings, all that. And then looking at the sheer numbers of how many, I mean, that's a huge impact for sure. Because when you look at, I think one of the most misunderstood parts about the impact on mountain biking too is how we actually include adult volunteers at the same time too. So we have 14,000 volunteer coaches right now annually participating. A lot of them are new riders, or a lot of them are riders that, because they can do this as a family, they can coach their own kids, because 78% of our coaches are parents. It's a real family sport. So we're drawing in adults more than we've ever had. But it's funny when I think about the impact that we've had, you can measure it by numbers, but I actually think there's a more important thing that we're doing is we're collectively having an impact on mountain bike culture in a way that you can't measure, right? And I talk about, well, I don't want to say us old farts, right? We're the ones who've been out here for a long time, and we had to earn it back in the day when trails were all straight uphill and double track, and you get the old, when I had to walk uphill and snow to school both ways kind of thing, right? But I also think that with NICA and what we've done and how we design our programming, we are focused on creating the next generation of cyclists, right? And we take that really seriously. Our whole goal is cyclists for life. We are a youth development organization, and we really focus on character development. We just, we use mountain bike as the tool. I think it's the coolest sport possible for that, but that is the tool to achieve, a youth development organization. But what I think the impact we're having is just, we are creating a generation of mountain bikers of, for lack of a better term, they're experiencing the way mountain biking should be, right? It should be fun. It should be inclusive. It should be based on your love of the sport and not on your performance or how fast you are or how fancy your bike is. We base everything on everyone cheers each other on. It's just a very welcoming, supportive, respectful environment. And I really do think that is the collective impact that we're having on mountain biking that I am seeing. And I can tell you a story in a second that illustrates this. But I think that is the more important impact, is we're creating a generation of respectful trail users, of ones that are in mountain biking for the right reasons. They were welcomed into the sport in a way that's going to stick with them for the rest of their lives. And it's funny, I was thinking about a story to illustrate this the other day when you sent some questions along, and my husband and I were down in Gooseberry Mesa a couple of weeks ago. A lot of folks will know Goose. Great riding, little technical, it's hard. A lot of slick rock, a lot of big power moves. Anyway, we were out there, pretty busy trail day, seeing a lot of users, and I'll say we didn't have any bad interactions. We also didn't have a lot of great ones, but I remember there was a point where I came around a corner, and if you know Goose, there's a bunch of these moves where you just come around a corner and it's like, oh my gosh, there's this wall of, rock that I need to ride up. Yeah. And I came around a corner and kind of startled a guy who was on the side of the trail, and I started making this power move. He clearly had not made it. I made it up and over. And it was hilarious because, at least to me, because I knew within 3 seconds, this gentleman was probably part of NICA, because he pulled over. He was at the side of the trail. He was cheering me on every step of the way, saying, go, 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 you got it. Yeah. And then ahead, he was yelling up to his riding partner of, someone's coming, pull over to the side. And I came around the corner for this next move, and there's this, 6th, 7th grader, maybe, same thing. Pulled over to the side, cheering me on, have a great day, you're doing awesome, kind of thing. And so my husband, does the same thing, rides along. And it's funny, we hit a trail junction maybe a minute later, and we had stopped. We were having a snack and looking at where we were going to go next. And this dad and kid pulled up, and not even 10 seconds into the conversation, I'm thinking to myself, like, 100% this is a NICA family, because they were like, oh, we're brand new. We just heard about this place. And this kid was so proud, because he unclipped his Camelback clip from his jersey, and he showed me his jersey. He's like, I'm on my local high school team. And he wasn't a high schooler. He was probably 7th grade, and started telling me all about his team. And then the dad turned out to be a coach, and they just started sharing their story. I had no NICA gear on whatsoever, and they had no idea that we were part of it. The whole point being is that what I'm seeing on the trail, I see this all the time because I travel a lot, and especially up here in Teton Valley where I run into riders constantly. I can tell within about 5 seconds if they're a NICA rider, because they're always very polite. They pull over, they follow the rules of the trail. They're being really respectful. They smile, they say thank you, they make eye contact. And I say this because it's a culture. It's a self-sustaining culture that it has a huge impact on other riders, right? And other trail users when you're out there. And so thanks for sticking with me through that story. But I think that is one of the best impacts I think that we are having on mountain biking in general, because I do think one of the biggest barriers towards getting any new trails developed, whether we have access taken away, it really is user conflict. And I say that, with a lot of experience and a lot of perspective, having seen it myself, is that if we don't start teaching and having this impact on, respectful use and trail interactions, and I do think that NICA is doing a very, very good job of that, then we'll lose access, and we won't get access to more. So collectively, numbers, we're having a massive impact but I also think it's the culture. It's what we are doing to mountain biking culture that's going to have that lasting impact that we're all really proud of.
Yeah, that's great perspective, especially for those of us who aren't necessarily involved. I mean, I think mountain bikers in general are aware of NICA and that it's a good thing. But yeah, I think we do tend to focus on like, is this about participation and like just selling more bikes? Or, it sounds like it's a much bigger vision, which is to impact mountain bike culture. And it sounds like that's a success so far. And yeah, pretty cool to hear. So another big part of the NICA mission, I think you mentioned it, is inclusivity. So I'm curious, like, how can teams attract new student athletes who don't already have a family cycling background? You mentioned that for a lot of people, it's like a parent, coaches, or they have like an uncle or somebody that they know that rides. How do you attract like brand new people, or is that not even something that you're necessarily focused on?
Well, I think we all need to be focused on it, and we are very focused on it. I will say we are not as good at it as we need to be. I think our teams are very good at it, and the success that we see in that invitation absolutely is coming from the teams. Mm-hmm. The easiest way, and again, I was a head coach and a team director for a long time of our local team here. The best way to get someone, and I think especially a young kid involved, is invitation from their friends. I mean, it's just that simple. But it's supported invitation. It's not just a, hey, join this team. It's rad. It's right. Here's the time of the meeting. I will go with you. You can borrow a bike or the team will help you. Right. So that's what I mean by invitation backed with support. And I think that that's what our teams are really good at. And anyone who wants to get a new rider involved, I think that is the approach, right? It's intentional invitation, but with a, hey, I will help you. I'm not just going to point you towards the place to go. And I think that that's what our teams are really good at. If they're focused on recruiting, we have try it out programs, or we do days where kids can show up and try bikes and just get, some basic skills instruction, and they don't have to sign up right away. We have a policy where kids can sign a waiver and just participate and try a practice for once and see if, they like it or enjoy it. But I do think that intentional invitation with support is the first most impactful step. And there's no other better way to do it than kids inviting kids. But again, it has to be followed up with that support.
Yeah. It seems like too that NICA targets a lot of the same kids that maybe would have run track or cross country or used to run track and cross country. For parents or athletes who are more familiar with those sports that have been around for a long time, why would you say choose mountain biking instead? Or is it not a competitive thing and you're just like, do whatever you want?
Gosh, well, I have to not show my bias here, because I do think mountain biking is the best sport ever invented. But having said that, I mean, yeah, right. So I think your audience probably feels the same way. But I think, first, I think as parents, as adults, right, it's our job to support what kids are interested in, right? And I think supporting and cultivating that interest is the first best place to start, whether that's volleyball, whether that's, a STEM club or things like that. But I think from a parent perspective, what is unique about NICA and why I really encourage parents to check us out is how we include parents. We're really unique in that sense where, again, it's their job to support their kids and getting hopefully outdoors, happy and active and participating in sports, especially with what their friends are doing. But for the parent community, I think what parents find is they are invited in. They're invited in our sport in a way that other sports don't invite them, because we need them. We literally need them to coach, to volunteer at our events. And our coaching system requires that we have a high level of ratios, right, of coaches to student athletes. So we actually not only need them, we include them, we train them, and they are a very important part of our system from day one. So I think that in and of itself, of that invitation in, I mean, it takes 50 to 100 volunteers alone just to want to run one single NICA race.
Wow.
So we can't have them stand on the sidelines, so I would say track, cross country, yeah, you're outside. But I think what's unique and different is that NICA, one of our core values is community. And we really do invite parents in, and it turns into this just a really neat self-sustaining culture. And I've seen it pop up around teams. I've seen it pop up around races, and then just on a national scale where we're all in it together. Everyone cheers on everyone else. And so it is still an environment in which it's competitive, but it's not hyper competitive in that sense where it's us versus them. We're all here to support each other and cheer everyone on. And then you see it, at the campsite at night when kids are kids. So yes, they're up at 9:00 at night, the night before their race, playing capture the flag and doing other things. Yes, I know. Where, the old nerds and us, before races, we're in bed at 7:00, but these kids are out, hanging out around the campfire. And I think parents are seeing that too. And I think that's really, I think what sets NICA apart is that invitation for adults to come in. And of course, I'm biased, but you're not sitting inside in in the bleachers watching a basketball game. No knock on basketball, but I really do think that that's what sets us apart.
Yeah. I've been to one of these like big NICA races, like a statewide thing. And I mean, it's like a festival. It's like the whole weekend and people camp out and, they have tents set up and the parents hang out, the kids hang out. On the other hand, I mean, for some parents, maybe that's not their thing, right? Like, cross country is great. I just drop my kid off and, pick them up when they're done. So people have options, which I guess is a good thing.
Yeah, which is okay as well. And again, options are good. And I think that's for us, it's the invitation to be included, no requirement, but they have a choice, right? It's not they're being told to participate or not to participate. And it also, what I'm seeing too, gives them more time to ride their bikes. I see that happening as well too, is where you have the team practice meet at the trailhead and the team's going off for a ride. And then you'll see this kind of gain speed as the parents start meeting up and they have their own group rides. And again, that's all positive for us.
Yeah. Well, so one of the things, it seems like there's potentially a bit of tension between this idea of like inclusivity and fun and competition. And so I'm curious, like, how would you characterize the level of competition at NICA races or just like NICA in general for someone who's thinking about joining? They're like, what kind of league is this? Like, how do you describe the competition?
Yeah, a good question. Gosh, and it's actually a good description is tension. And I think, what NICA probably does better than any other sport, and again, I'm biased, but I think what we've figured out is how to take that super competitive, varsity athlete that's on a training plan and is showing up every day to really compete and possibly win, all the way down to that beginner 6th or 7th grader that's just coming to participate. Might race, might not race, might do the party lap, because we have that at NICA where it's a participatory lap where you just line up and you go for a lap on the course, no timing, no competition. But I do think what's unique about us is we have figured out how to take those two student athletes and include them on the same team and have them with the same level of support, of excitement, and of value on the effort that they put in. And what you'll see if you go to a NICA race, and any of the listeners haven't gone to one, I'd highly encourage going to one because, well, number one, it will blow you away the level of effort and how deep these kiddos will go, whether they're, again, the beginner 6th grader off the back to the fastest varsity athlete, of how deep they go to just give it their best. And that there's no indication on time, but you watch a NICA finish line and you see just the best in kids ever, and just the exhaustion and the pride. And
are there a lot of kids that throw up at the end? Like, did they really like go that hard? I feel like that's a kid thing to do. No,
I've never seen it.
Okay.
No, maybe not right after a race. Right. I think that there's a lot of nerves prior for sure. And again,
I was at a cross country race recently, and it's like every other kid that came across the line was like hacking in the grass afterward. So it's not as intense. Maybe that's a good thing.
It could be. I don't know. I mean, it's not that I haven't seen it, but again, I've been so over the years focused on coaching my riders that doesn't mean it's not happening. But they dig that deep, absolutely. But I think back to your question, I don't think, believe it or not, I don't think competition is a dirty word. I think sometimes it gets a little bit too much branded as we can't be inclusive and also show up to compete on the day. Right. And I do think with how NICA focuses on youth development and how we coach, how it's character development based, and how we are looking for, for lack of a better term, youth development outcomes, we actually balance it really, really well. We give space and support for the kids who really want to show up on the day and compete to win, and kids who are doing the same thing and might have not as good of outcomes, and and again, we have podiums, but I think it's the way that we coach and the way that we include keeps that, hyper competitiveness in check. Because if I'll give you an example. Like when I was a head coach, quite often, and all of our, we have lead officials, right? The chief official at every race, and we have league directors and rules committees and things like that too. But if we get, say, a kid reports that another kid passed him or was a block or something like that, what's our first step is that if that's, quote unquote, reported to the official walks over to my team tent, and this is across NICA, walks over to my team tent and says, "Hey, Amanda, so-and-so rider had this, infraction or whatever reported. Could you talk to him or her?" So, yeah, great. Of course. And I go and I understand what the situation was described as. And I just go have a conversation with the kid. Like, how'd this go down? Right. And just tell me from your experience. And again, from every step of the way, rarely do we give penalties, because and sometimes we do, right? It's a rules-based sport and we have to have rules, but what we, from top to bottom, from how we include kids to how we enforce rules at races, we are looking for good youth development outcomes. And so as a coach, and oftentimes too, we'll bring those two riders together, say, "You two talk about this. What happened out there?" Right? You tell us. And we look for the learning rather than the penalty. So we see this all the time. Heated competition, you get bumping over the line, or someone takes a bad line, or someone makes a bad pass. Most often what we're trying to do is educate these kids and potentially the coaches that reported this as a, rule violation or something of, hey, what was really going on here? And was it a communication thing that you could have done better next time? Did you forget to teach your riders how to pass before a race that had a lot of single track on it? It's those kinds of things. So I think to the question of, how do we keep the competitiveness in check? We encourage kids to show up and give it their best on the day, and also understand that they can't control everything. And again, from every aspect of the organization, from coach to official to how we apply rules, we're just always looking for those youth development outcomes rather than to penalize and to punish.
Yeah. That's a great example too, because I assume that's different from professional level or even adult level races where I don't know, I assume blocking would be maybe part of a strategy sometimes in a race for adults, but it sounds like there's a different set of rules and safeguards in place to keep, one, to keep the racers safe, but also probably so that competition doesn't get too intense. Yeah.
And again, we're trying to teach them how to make good decisions. I think one of the things kids like the best about mountain biking is there's no one yelling at them. You go, right? If you think about it, you go to, basketball game, or, parents are always there. They're always cheering. Coaches are overcoaching and they're giving a lot of instruction. I think for mountain biking, especially, one of the best things is they just go right away. And they get to go out there. And we have to understand too, as coaches and just anyone in youth sports, is that's really what we're trying to get across to these kids, is that we're preparing you and you have to go out there and make your own decisions. So for your example with the blocking, sometimes they're blocking, but sometimes it's totally unintentional. Like they don't know that they're doing that. And so it becomes an education thing. Or quite frankly, if they are blocking, we have that, at least when I was coaching, I would have what I called the empathy conversation of the, hey, so if you were really fast on the downhill and someone wasn't letting you by, how would that feel? Would you want that to be, what I mean? So it's every time we're looking for that youth development opportunity, because again, this isn't about, when it's gold medals and professional and elite competition, that's just an entirely different playing field. And I think as an organization, we're pretty solid in what what we're seeking for outcomes. And it really is that growth and development and that learning opportunity so they can self-regulate that in the future.
Yeah. It seems like too, as NICA has been around for a while now and has developed in a few areas, we're starting to see these Devo groups that pop up that are outside of NICA. And, it's more for those student athletes who are super competitive. Do you see those groups as sort of a pressure relief valve, or how is NICA sort of interface with those groups, if at all?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's nothing but positive. What NICA is, I think we're really, really clear on is that we aren't an elite development organization. We happen to be having, I think, a pretty big impact on elite development, but that's not at all by design. I think that's just a real cool effect of including so many kids in the right way, right? And teaching them the love for the sport early. And I do think a lot of these Devo teams are filling that gap. And I've talked about this before, that I think right now in the United States that there is no true development pathway. I mean, there's a big gap, I think, between NICA and Olympics, or NICA and professional level. And I say gap meaning there's a lot of opportunity, but if you aren't really close to it, or and I say close to it as someone who's knowledgeable about the system or can help you navigate it, there's no real clear pathway, right, of what to do if you have some more interest or a little bit more ability, or you want to train harder, you want a higher level of competition. Where NICA ends is pretty clear, but where that next step begins is pretty unclear. And some of it right now feels, I know, to a lot of athletes that have gone through the system, or parents or kids who are trying to navigate this right now, it's not obvious to them. And I think that is a big opportunity for someone in the United States to pick that up. And I think, to your point, that a lot of these Devo teams are filling that gap. I mean, you got great programs, like Durango Devo is legendary for doing this. But I think on the scale of what NICA is doing, and the quality of what Durango Devo is doing, that quality of what Durango Devo is doing is not scaled across the country at this point. So I think those development teams are great. They sometimes operate in conjunction with NICA. You'll have, overarching 501c3 that runs year-round programs. Is part of the time they're NICA, part of the time they're Devo. I don't want to say it's clunky, but as long as there's clear delineation, I think the teams that are doing it really well are doing it very well. I think it's nothing but positive, because again, if there's an opportunity or a desire combined with an opportunity for a kid to want to go to a higher level than NICA, Devo teams are filling that gap for sure.
Yeah. That's helpful info, hopefully, for some people who are in that situation. So in 2020, I understand you had a serious mountain bike crash. What can you tell us about your accident and recovery?
Oh gosh, my best advice is don't go over the handlebars going over 20 miles an hour. I think that's essentially, to anybody, if you can help it. And I have an understanding too. I get this question a lot of, how is I'll go into detail of my accident. How has it impacted your riding? And it honestly hasn't, because I was not doing anything special. At least to me, it wasn't special at the time. And I think it's just, for a lot of us who ride a lot, ride higher level stuff, or, just law of averages, the likelihood that you're going to have an accident is sometimes just chance. And so, this was 2020. So it's thick of the pandemic. And I was out on one of those that we call them the Idaho epics, where there's a lot of half pushing your bike, half getting out there. One of those really long, epic backcountry rides. And I was out with a girlfriend, and I was just nothing fancy, going really fast in a straight line on a really old trail. So it was kind of, it was grass kind of growing over the top of it. And I hit a rock, probably football size thing, going really, really, it just brought my front wheel to a stop. And the best way to describe it is I lawn darted. Didn't even put my hands out.
Oh man.
And just landed, did a flip, landed flat on my back, but was immediately paralyzed and just didn't have any feeling below, my chin, basically immediately. Wow. And it was wake up call is not the way to describe it. It was, I had never, unless anyone's gone through this before, it was one of those, I have not experienced anything like this ever. Like literally do not know what to do at this point. Cause I couldn't really do anything because I couldn't move, but whole long story short, it turned into a long backcountry extraction, got helicoptered out, and it was a severe spinal cord injury. And so I had an injury at C456, which essentially temporarily paralyzed me. And again, because of, I think the brain has designed itself to protect, your memory gets spotty, I think, for a reason. And so, what I really recall is probably 45 minutes of an hour of just, lying there, not doing much other than trying to stay calm and wait for a helicopter to slowly getting some feeling back. And then, I did get sensation back over time, and it turned from being, completely paralyzed into basically the worst pain I could ever describe to anybody. And so that's pretty typical with spinal cord injuries. And what happened to me is I ended up, in the hospital for a bunch of days, and it was mostly for pain management. And it was a long road for sure. Had to, learn to walk again, then learn to use my hands again, then learn how to navigate that whole thing, and had a pretty bad concussion too. But it was definitely, quite the journey. I am pretty much back to full function at this point, was just shocking. I have
that's great.
A lot of gratitude, probably a little bit of survivor's guilt at the same time because of it. Because it to me, it really makes no sense of, why me, why I've been so lucky and others haven't, but have done my best to regain all that. The joy I've always had for mountain biking, even through that injury, I think it's heightened it even more. And, I couldn't ride for about a year. I have, nerve pain that's kind of left over in my hands from it, a little bit of weakness in one of my arms. It'll probably kind of linger forever. And, got a whole bunch of hardware holding my neck together too.
Wow.
But yeah, I mean, there's probably a lot more to it, but I think that, I don't ever think of myself as an inspiration story. That's for sure. I mean, I just think it was a very personal journey. One of the best outcomes of it though, is that I realized how awesome the mountain biking community is, because it was, again, I was in the hospital for a bunch of days, and it was the local mountain bike community and the local NICA team that showed up, walked my dogs, filled my refrigerator, chopped our wood. I mean, it was, the meal train, a lot of support. And, I think, mountain bikers have that ability to band together, and they definitely supported me. So I try and do everything that I can to pay that forward.
We took it all. We brought them to our land. An endless night, ember hot and icy cold. The rage of the earth. We made this curse. Carved it in the blood on our backs. We did not see. We could not, but she did. And in the end,
What will I become? Senua's Saga. Hellblade 2.
Play it now with Game Pass.
Yeah. Well, right. If you don't see yourself as an inspiration, at least, it does illustrate what an inspiration the mountain bike community can be, and can be supportive and all of those things for people. That's awesome. One of the other kind of areas that I know you're involved in, and that NICA plays a role in, is trail building and maintenance. So I'm curious, how is NICA encouraging young folks and maybe even parents to get involved in trail building and maintenance?
We put a lot of emphasis on being a respectful and good steward of trails, right? And we do that mostly through our Teen Trail Corps program. So Teen Trail Corps was one of our first programs that we started outside of just team practice and racing in the mid well, it's probably 2014, 15, we started it up. It was with this idea that I think it came out of it. Any of us who've been around mountain biking for a long time know that old ethic of you ride, you dig, right? It's just the way it went. And I think how it's just like advocacy, right? I think has grown and changed over time. Teen Trail Corps has as well. But this program essentially gave kids, and still does to this day, an incentive to go out and do local trail maintenance, to make sure that they're partnering with their local organizations to get involved, right? And I think it's teaching, and we count hours, right? We have a way for teams, and it turns into a little bit of friendly competition, especially at the league level, of what team does how many service hours a year. I mean, it's pretty robust. We did collectively as an organization over 50,000 hours of trail work last year. Wow. It's massive. Wow. It is a massive impact. And we're doing our very best to elevate that up now to the level of, it's not just the, you ride, you dig ethic, but it's advocacy, right? It's getting kids educated in the importance of their voices being heard, whether that's the local, Parks and Rec department, considering, new trail amenities, or all the way up to asking for federal support dollars for local trails. And so much like everything that we do with youth development, we do take really seriously that we are hopefully impacting mountain biking in the future in a positive way, other than just ridership, but with this stewardship ethic as well, of teaching them that these trails just don't show up, right? Because I think that's a when you think about the local, and I give this analogy all the time of, if you play baseball, you play basketball, you play soccer, like those fields and courts are there. They're built for you. The school has provided them, the local Parks and Rec, or whatever, entity you have funding these things, they're funded, they're maintained. You show up, it's reserved for you, you play the game, and then you leave. Versus with mountain biking, we've had to fight for access, and we've had to fight for the ability to build trails And that's a really important part about getting more access and about maintaining access as well. And so teaching kids as part of being a mountain biker that there is the inherent needed stewardship ethic is a really important part of just being, a good mountain biker, but also turning into the adult advocate, because our access, we know it's gotten better over the years. We still have issues with illegal trail building and limited access all over the country, but it is improving. But it's also, we don't want kids or anyone to ever lose sight of the fact that trails are a privilege. They really are, right? They are a privilege, and being on them. And again, most kids that are coming from other sports are very used to, you have that baseball field reserved. That's your baseball field. You'd never have another group riding up and wanting to play a game at the same time. And I think just that's an inherent part of our sport, is we have to learn to share. We have to learn to be respectful, and we have to learn to be good stewards. And so that's been really important to NICA since day one. And it's so strong now that, again, like I mentioned, we have leagues that kind of make it a friendly competition of what teams can do the most service hours. We actually give podiums for, we'll see some really cool branded shovels at the season end awards of like what team has done the most service hours. And again, now that's even more important with the new generation of advocacy. And again, with the proliferation of professional trail builders, there's not as much need. There's still need, but not as much as there used to be for getting in there and building ourselves. It really is taking it to that next level of being true educated advocates.
Yeah. It seems like, just having all these young athletes, it's a huge opportunity, like in terms of kind of what you're saying, like going in front of your city council or your county and saying, hey, we want trails. I mean, who's going to say no to kids? Like I've seen it where I live, where it was the skateboarders. They went in front of the city council and they got like $250,000 to build a better skate park. And it's like, seems like there's so many of these opportunities that NICA enables in a lot of communities. And it sounds like too, that's very intentional, that you're training these student athletes to understand their role and understand advocacy. Yeah.
And again, it's important. Well, I think for anyone who's listening too, that hasn't made, if you have one, and especially if you're in trail advocacy, if you haven't made that local connection to your NICA team, please do so, because that's the first best opportunity. Because you're right. It's really, really hard to say no to kids, but then thinking bigger picture, where what we're looking to achieve in the United States with better health outcomes, that is the focus right now, is how do we serve youth? How do we create a generation of happier, healthier, more well-balanced, active kids? This really is an opportunity, if you aren't taking advantage of it, whether you're planning a local trail or working with your, local land manager. Bring in that NICA team and bring in that head coach, because it's really an untapped advocacy resource.
Yeah. Well, speaking of kids and advocacy, some of the most passionate young riders seem to be those kids that are like hanging out, building dirt jumps in the woods. Like they just ride because they love riding, not because their parent is like, you need to sign up for a sport, or like, I like mountain biking, so you should too. Like these are the kids that they love mountain biking. And, NICA clearly has a focus on like cross country racing and accessible trails, even going so far as like there's rules in terms of like how difficult trails can be for NICA training and events and things. So how do you connect with these like super passionate young riders that are looking for maybe a different mountain bike experience? Like, is that something that you're aware of, or is there a way to reach those kids?
Yeah, highly aware. And first, I think big picture, I think about how, I'm sure you were the same way, how we were raised as kids. We were on our bikes all the time. At least I was, right? And I had never actually, quote unquote, rode bikes as a kid, but you were out at the dirt jumps around the dump, and we were just riding around. And that free play, the more we can safely encourage free play at this point, the better, right? So just want to make a statement on that. But I also think too that what NICA does well, first, we're never going to, be all things to all people. Because I think we get this question, when are you going to do NICA cyclocross? Or when are you going to do NICA downhill or gravity or this or that? Yeah. And I would never say never, but I will say it's absolutely not in the plan. at least for now. But I do see the need, and I also recognize though is what we do really well, and we're generally focused on a team based format, right? Because we look at that age group. It's a pretty expansive age group, but it's 6th to 12th grade. Really, what keeps kids in sport is friendships. It really is. It's friendships, it's connection to good mentors. But really at that age, they want to feel included. They want to feel like they're part of something. They want to feel like they're learning, they're growing, they're being challenged. But it really is dictated by what their friends are doing. And so what I think NICA has done, and again, that's not for all kids, but I think generally speaking, it's friendships and relationships that keep them in sport. So for us, we have found that cross-country mountain biking is the most conducive. It's the most conducive format to team-based mountain biking, right? Because it's also, I mean, there's a barrier to entry as well for coaching, right? Because when you get to those higher level advanced moves, you're talking jumps, drops, gaps. I will say most
insurance must be ridiculous for that.
Won't even go down that road, but I will say that skill gap between I will say most 14-year-olds, 13-year-olds that I'm seeing, again, we have a lot of downhill trails around here. They have grown up riding that stuff. I have kids who can ride one-handed wheelies backwards around me, right? Because this is just the skill level, right, of the kids. Generally speaking, and no knock on our coaches, is the best thing that I do, is far exceeding some of our skill sets for that advanced level riding. And so it's not a commentary on anything other than just an observation of the format that we do it, I think, with cross-country mountain bike racing and, team practice. To be clear, racing is not required in NICA. I think it's one of the most misunderstood things about NICA is that you have to race. About 65% of our student athletes race.
Oh,
they're just going to team practice. And once in a while they're trying to race, or they're going out and doing the party lap. One year they might race, or they might join the program for the summer and then go, play football in the fall. Our whole goal is to get kids riding bikes, not racing bikes. Yeah. But in terms of how our program is structured, I think it is limited in the sense of, for all the coaching needs, for all the team-based needs, and again, the needs that we're trying to meet for that 6 to 12 age group, we found that cross-country mountain biking is the most conducive to that.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So for parents who maybe aren't familiar with mountain biking and they've got a kid and their kid's friend is on the team and their kid starts getting involved and they're like, I have no idea about this mountain biking thing. What are some of the questions that you hear from parents, or what advice do you have for those parents who just know nothing about mountain bike racing, nothing about NICA? What's kind of your advice for them, getting started and getting a handle on it?
I mean, first best advice is if your kid is expressing interest, that's your first indicator, right? If they are interested or questioning what their level of interest is, right? Because I think you will find success if it comes from within, from that kiddo who's just like, I want to ride a bike. What does it look like? And just say, all right, well, I'll reach out to the local head coach. I mean, that it really is. You start with if you're a parent and you say, I know nothing about this, you could either call a fellow parent because they know what that whole experience is like, or just, go to the league website, because all of the state leagues have a website where you can reach out and find where your local teams are and just reach out to that head coach. And no one in NICA is ever going to give you trouble if you say, I know nothing, because all of us started off with knowing nothing. I think if anything, you're going to get a high degree of support, everything down to hand-holding on equipment, on what's required, on where to find a bike, on where practices are. And really, I think what's so neat about the NICA culture we talked about before of parents being really included. We know parents are such a key part of supporting the program that from day one, we try really hard to keep the knowledge barrier, right, to entry really, really low, because everyone always wants to help. And even down to, if you don't even have a bike, you don't have shoes, you don't have anything, you're showing up in gym shorts, great, just show up. I mean, that's literally all it takes to join a NICA team, because there's no such thing as a bench. There's no such thing as a tryout. We're really, really good and well skilled at helping beginners. And that goes for beginner parents as well, too.
Yeah. I'm just imagining if I was a parent who knew nothing, I would be like, is this safe? How expensive is this going to be? And maybe some other more minor questions, but mostly it would be about is this safe and why is it so expensive? That would probably be my follow-up question once I find out how expensive it is. I mean, is that typical for parents that are new to this? And, I imagine there are ways that you're able to address that.
Very typical. I mean, I still think what you just said is probably the reason I never played hockey as a kid, right? Because I think my dad said the same thing.
I have a kid who plays ice hockey, and it's I know nothing about it. I'm a mountain biker, and it's going the other way.
Begged and got the hard no because, uncle had too many injuries. You know how that whole story goes. So in some ways, I mean, the parent is the decider, right? And also understanding that the parent has a huge amount of influence on what a child is going to be able to do or not do, and recognize that. If the answer is no, of course the answer is going to be no. We know that. But also, I would encourage parents to just be curious and be honest and just ask those questions of like, I know nothing. And where do I start? Is this safe? And we said, well, relative to everything else. Yeah, absolutely. There's always a level of inherent risk, right? You're outdoors, you're riding a bike. You heard my story. Certainly not common, but can happen. But I would also extend that to any other sport. And I wouldn't probably bore them with the details if we have years of safety study data. We're actually, we've been partnered with the University of Utah for many years. We're actually the main participant in the largest safety study on a youth sport ever in the United States right now. So we've compiled a lot of data. We are not above or below any other typical youth sport, whether it's concussions, whether it's injuries. And we, for good reason, use our safety data and anything we learn. And we can drill down into the detail of where our injuries that do happen, where are they happening and why are they happening? Are they on corners? I mean, we have that level of detail. And then we can change our coach education. We can change course design. But I would tell any parent that, has issues, or not issues, but just is trying to understand the sport. I would never try and tell them that it's safe or it's not. I would just trying to explain them of how we do programming and then what the sport's about. Right. Yeah. And that with NICA especially, we have such a focus, and we call it internally risk management, but we really just call it progression, right? Is making sure that riders are, and we spend a lot of time in our coach education doing this, that riders are assessed, right? They're assessed for what's their skill, what's their level of confidence, and what's their ability. And of course, putting the caveat on no one's brain is fully developed until they're 24 or 25, right? With risk management, who you're dealing with too. And I would just tell them more about what the sport is like and how we educate and how we train and what situations we do put kids in, rather than ever tell anyone it's 100% safe or not. I think you just be honest about the risks, which, there are some, but not bigger than any other sport. And of course, I think back in the day, I think we've done a good job now of fighting this stereotype, but we're not Red Bull Rampage, right? I think a lot of folks that are, and I say that honestly, like if we go to, we're trying to convince the local school principal of starting a local mountain bike team. We're actually pretty intentional of telling them we're not Red Bull Rampage. We're insured. Here's our risk management. Here's our abuse prevention systems. I mean, we're very, not only reputable organization, but professionally run with safety in mind. And so I think it's just sharing a story with folks of how we do things, and that there's inherent risk in everything, but that we have a very, very high focus on managing that safety and risk.
Yeah. That's a great answer. So finally, I want to ask you, what are the biggest opportunities for NICA over the next 5 years, and how can our listeners help you support that mission?
Well, first I'll say this. I imagine you might have a couple coaches listening. And so I'll just say just a big thank you to our coaches. At NICA, we are only successful on the backs of volunteers. And we have over 14,000 volunteer coaches right now that make this organization successful. They're the ones coaching the kids, and they're the ones doing, I think, the hard work on the ground. And I've been there as a coach myself for 8 years, and just, I'd be remiss if I didn't say a huge thank you to the coaches, because we literally depend on them to make this program successful. And so, and how people can help, my first is, get involved, try and be a coach if there is a local opportunity. And I encourage anybody who thinks that they wouldn't be a good mountain bike coach to actually think about what makes a good coach, and not actually involve a personal assessment of your own skill level at all to indicate whether you'd be a good coach. Because oftentimes, folks think, I'm not good enough, or I'm not fast enough, I couldn't keep up with the kids, I wouldn't know what to teach them. I try and reverse that and remind folks of, if you look back and you remember what your best coach or teacher was like when you're a kid, you don't remember those things. Like, you remember, were they kind? Were they patient? Were they compassionate? Were they fun? Were they did they show up for you? Did they educate you, teach you new stuff or whatever that is? And so when I hear folks say like, oh, I could never coach, I'm like, yes, you can. And I see this especially with moms and especially with women where they don't think that they have the skill level. Like, you're running a family of 5, right? You are, absolutely the right person for the job because of who you are, not what you can do. So I always encourage people to think about what kids really need for mentors. And it really doesn't have anything to do with your skill level as a mountain biker. I always say I can teach you how to ride. That's actually really easy. It's harder for me to teach you how to be a good person. And I think that's really what we're looking for is in a coach. So, I mean, that's my plug for coaching because it's had a huge impact on my life. And again, it's how our organization runs. And, for NICA in the next, 5 years, I think we're looking at the next phase of growth. Absolutely. I think what we talked about before, how ridership has kind of leveled off. We've seen the same in NICA. I think we've seen that across the board. We saw a bunch of new ridership. We saw some old riders kind of drop off. It's hard to know what our data, is telling us entirely until we get a few years out. But I think we all have to collectively invest in this idea that new riders is really where we need to be, right? Is investing our time in that intentional invitation. And that's what we're trying to do at NICA as well. And being intentional about our partnerships, reaching out to folks that don't mountain bike at all. I mean, I really think that is it. Because if we are, and I think the cycling industry is doing a little bit of the same thing. If we continuously talk to the same people, right? Or the same, I mean, not to knock on the companies, but I think sometimes when you're trying to sell an $11,000 bike, you're fighting over the same customer, right? And that customer, they're already taken care of, right? And I think collectively, whether you're in the industry, youth programming, building trails, it's really thinking about that intentional invitation to the new riders, because that's how we're going to grow. So I think for NICA, we're looking really hard at what we can do to be more accessible, to bring trails closer to kids, to have more teams, to bring races and events closer so those drive times aren't so long. And also at younger ages. We're seriously considering, and no promises at this point, but we're looking at programming, at least introductory programming for younger ages, because I think there's a big gap in the United States right now. And again, not to say there's some amazing programs out there. You got Little Bellas and, the Durango Devos, Sprock Kids, things like that are doing elementary level or age programming, but no one is doing it on the scale of NICA. And so we know we have that ability. And again, it's just something that's in the back of our minds right now, thinking about how can we play a role in continuing to reach out to new riders. Because I really think that is where we all need to be thinking right now, is how do we create that invitation? How do we include more beginner families and people who don't already mountain bike? So I'll say it's folks like us and probably a lot of the listeners of, man, we know this is already the best sport in the world, right? Because we are so into it and we're so passionate. But if we do want to see this collective, the tide that rises all boats, and I mean like more trails, better innovation, more federal funding for trails, for access, for connected infrastructure, this is how we get there. I mean, when you think about big picture as an advocate, as a voter block, we're small potatoes, right? You look at the other user groups across the country. So again, I always like to look out and zoom way, way out and what our collective goals should be. And I think that's what NICA is doing. I think we all should be doing it, but it's really that invitation of new ridership. And that's the next step for us.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, Amanda, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us about NICA and what the group has been up to the last few years. And yeah, hopefully we'll continue to keep in touch and hear about the latest. So thank you.
Yeah, thanks. It was a lot of fun.
Well, you can get more information and find out how you can get involved with NICA at nationalmtb.org. And we'll have that link in the show notes. That's all we've got this week. We'll talk to you again next week.